I'm Letschin, Field CTO with Nexenta, and I'm here to talk to you about NexentaConnect for XenDesktop. It is the latest in software-defined storage for acceleration and analytics for your VDI environment, specifically built around Citrix XenDesktop sitting on a vSphere environment. When you look at the different kinds of VDI today and the ways you can deploy storage, really there's three different kinds. You've either got your traditional storage model, utilizing some of the vendors that you're used to having in your data center today. Or you can go into a converged model or hyper-converged, depending on how you look at it, but that shared nothing model. The third way you can do it is utilizing a software-defined storage solution like Nexenta Store that you're already aware of today. Any of these have their purposes, they've got their place. But what you can tell is where there's some that are good for one thing, not always great for the next. Let's take the first example. When you look at that traditional storage, you've really got your ESX hosts with storage behind them, and you're grabbing SAN data stores out of them. Now NexentaConnect can add our I/O engine onto that and accelerate that solution. But where do those solutions really fit? Really, they're going to fit into places like office workers, your executives that always want the same desktop, because really it's for persistent desktops. That's when you always need to know you're always going to get the same desktop every time. But then you move on to the shared nothing solution. That was that middle solution we talked about. That's where you're going to have your traditional ESXi host utilizing local storage and determining that becomes your storage solution. When you start combining those two, you can now get the stateless desktop environment without having additional shared storage in the background. This really comes into play for call centers and manufacturing, places where you can always get a different desktop and it doesn't matter. A lot of legal environments where they're very locked down desktops and it doesn't matter who you are, you always get the same desktop. Sometimes you see it in medical even. So in nurses' stations or in patient rooms where you just want to be able to get in, get to a couple specific applications, but you don't have any customization and you're not changing your background and your start menu, things like that. But you can still use a persona management solution with this and have a very stable environment. So really, when you're looking at how to do each of those solutions, now you can look at NexentaConnect for XenDesktop to give you acceleration on all of those. Not only can you get the acceleration on the shared storage that you're used to, or on that shared nothing environment and utilizing local storage, but you're also able to look at the analytics of each one of those desktops and see things like how much bandwidth they're consuming. VDI is a very community environment, so you've got to be aware of what every user is doing and be able to see that quickly to troubleshoot for your administrators. NexentaConnect is going to be able to provide you up to a 70% SAN offload. What that really means is that SAN that you have in place that might not have been designed for VDI, maybe it wasn't designed to do exactly what you want, but you have it, you can use more of that storage because you're not worried about the load on it. You're able to pull that up and bring the desktops as close as possible to the compute. So your storage is right beside your compute, giving you the best performance you can come up with. So how do we do that? Well, we start with this traditional ESXi host. It's going to have that shared storage or just traditional storage with VMDK coming into it. Doesn't have to be the SAN data store. On top of that, we have our NexentaConnect manager, and then we're going to deploy out our I/O engine. That I/O engine is going to deploy an NFS mount that you're then going to deploy your desktops onto. The great thing about NexentaConnect for XenDesktop is it doesn't change the way you deploy your desktops. We simply give you an accelerated storage solution that you can then go deploy your desktops inside Citrix Studio. Speaking of those desktops, the first thing you're going to see is that first level, your replica, your base image, the things that you're used to seeing, the OS level. That's your Windows 7, your Windows 8 base image. Those are the same across most of your desktops. So by utilizing the core Nexenta Store DNA that we have built into NexentaConnect, we're able to give you accelerated performance for that base image right away by pulling that into cache, potentially right beside the compute layer. The next component you're going to look at is that full persistent layer. Whether it's persistent or stateless, there's that desktop layer, that layer that is the rest of the environment. For those, if you've got persistent desktops, then utilize the shared storage solution and still get the acceleration. If you don't, then now you're going to use that persona management solution. And you can do that for persistent or non-persistent, but definitely you're going to want to look at it for your non-persistent desktops. Those stateless desktops now can be utilized for all of your use cases where those people want to be able to have their environment, their start menu, their background, all the little things that they tune on different applications, they now have available by using a different persona management. That can sit on any shared storage you have in place, or that same shared storage that you're utilizing and accelerating because now we've done that offload. So before we get into a demo, let's go through a few prerequisites and some basics you're going to need to know about NexentaConnect before you jump right in. First off, you're going to have the management environment. It's Active Directory, DHCP, DNS. DHCP, make sure you've got a big enough scope and a short enough lease while testing so you don't run out of IP addresses. It's a very common mistake when you start deploying VDI. Then that actual VDI environment. We're going to utilize anything from ESX 5.5 or newer, along with vCenter 5.5 or newer, and XenDesktop 7.5 or newer. You're going to want to have that entire environment set, test a little small pool. Now you're going to go ahead and deploy it. That environment is crucial to have a successful rollout. What do you need for those requirements for NexentaConnect? Well, first off, you're going to have the manager. The manager is going to take, somewhere around 4 gigs of RAM for you, and then of course a single vCPU. On top of that, you're going to need about 20 gigs worth of space, just to keep the database for the analytics that I was telling you about. Then on each one of your hosts, we're going to deploy an I/O engine. That I/O engine needs to have 16 gigs of RAM and about 8 gigs of hard drive space for you to be able to utilize. And then on top of that, we also have our manager. That manager, on the delivery controller, you just have to add in one agent that allows us to see what each of those desktops is so we can give you those analytics. You put all that together and you're going to have a very fast, accelerated, and environment that you can see all the analytics per desktop. So let's jump right into that demo now and take a look at it. We're going to start on the main dashboard. Check and first make sure you have a vCenter server registered. You're going to need that. This is our demo environment, so I already have it. Now you get the overview of it, and let's take a look at the storage summary. We've already deployed one I/O engine, so you can see a lot of the information here. Everything from CPU usage to cache hit. Even as you add desktops, you'll see them there. That's also where you'll see a lot of your monitoring on the per desktop. But when you go in, we first want to deploy our first I/O engine on this cluster. So we have our choice between SAN data store or whether it's internal storage for its shared nothing architecture. We're going to go ahead and choose where we want the I/O engine to lay, where we want data volume set, and all the different settings you're going to need to be able to deploy both your caching solution for the acceleration and then where those desktops will reside. So in this scenario, we're going to go ahead and use a VMFS data store for our I/O engine because we already have a cluster set for it. If you're using your SAN data store, you might put it someplace different. Once you select it, you simply use the drop-down, find the data store that you want, and go ahead and click through the process. When you go to the next screen, you're going to do a lot of your network settings on your second screen. So if you've already got a dedicated network for your NFS traffic, you can go ahead and set that. You can also change the different I/O image that you're looking at. You can use the management network, but that's not normally recommended. But for a small environment, you might need to. Once you've got your IP set, we go into the next screen, and the first thing we're going to do is decide how many desktops approximately you think you're going to put on this environment. If you know that you're going to put a larger number of desktops on, the first thing you want to do is calculate to make sure there's enough space. So we'll go ahead and kick off this test first with 100. We'll speed these next few steps up a little just so you can see it. We noticed 100 was too many, so we cut it down. Now we're going to recalculate it at 10 and see what it tells us both for memory, for CPU, and for capacity. Now we're good, so we go ahead and click deploy. Once we've deployed it, you can start tracking the log and watching what happens. Everything in the log will show you every action we're taking. We're really automating the entire process of deploying the resource pool, deploying the entire I/O engine. And if we jump back over to the vCenter, you'll be able to see it in the logs on vCenter. We're going to skip through a few of these steps and let you see the automation happen. So we've already done the cloning of the I/O engine, and we're already creating the resource pool. But once you get through that takes a few minutes to do. Then we're going to go ahead and power them on and get everything set, everything tweaked and tuned so that you have an I/O engine ready to go to deploy your desktops on. Right now you'll notice we don't have any, and this is just a blank I/O engine. It does tell you where it is and still all the performance information. But we're going to go ahead and jump back over to Citrix Studio because that's really where you're going to deploy your desktops at. It really only has one step for us to be able to create everything you need to be able to access this storage. You simply go into the hosting menu and we're going to create exactly what we need to put the desktops on it. We're going to go ahead and add this connection and the resources into this new space. We'll give it a name for it, we'll tell it what cluster we're looking at, and then you just find the storage that you just created. In this case, it's pretty easy. We know it's on our management cluster, and we just deployed it onto management. So when we click Next, now you find the storage we just created. It'll always show up as Nexenta Desktop Storage, so you know which one it is. Since the I/O engine was already deployed, and if you don't remember, you can always go back and look at those logs that are on the NexentaConnect console. Once you set Next and Finish, you're going to go ahead and already have the connection and the resource set up. Because we've already got the one created, we're going to use that one to go look at some of the desktops. So we deployed some desktops on it to take a look at. With these desktops, you'll start seeing some cache hit ratios, some CPU usage, and as more desktops are created, we'll start showing those in the desktop count. These are just going for giving you the latency, I/O, bandwidth, as well as how much acceleration you're getting, and of course the data reduction. Those are probably the two biggest things that you're going to look at on these stats. Keep in mind, once you've deployed the I/O engine, you never really have to come back to here unless you want to see the analytics. The good thing is, on those analytics, whether you're looking at from the I/O engine standpoint, or we jump over and now we can look at on a per desktop basis. We mentioned being community, this is where that comes into play. See your bandwidth, see your throughput, all in one spot. So that's really what the demo is. Now that you've seen that demo, I'm sure you're wondering what else you have to know before you jump into it. First off, remember this is built for XenDesktop MCS, for machine creation services. If you're looking at PVS, Nexenta Store is a fantastic solution for you. It's really not as storage intensive. But even on that, we can drop that down to about a $15 per desktop environment. And I'm sure you've seen the studies out there on that already. Outside of that, remember this is software only. This is truly a software-defined storage product that deploys to give you storage, the acceleration, and the analytics of your desktop without having to add hardware to the environment. If you want to know how to get a hold of it, it's on a per desktop basis, and you just contact your local reseller. Either that local reseller, or go ahead and send us an email at sales@nexenta.com, and we'll connect you with somebody that can get you access to NexentaConnect for XenDesktop right away.